Hi, and welcome to the Literary Sipper. This is Amber Vitti Hill, and today we are going to be talking about decluttering books and why is it so hard. But before we get into that, I do want to acknowledge that I've had a summer break, and thank you for coming back with me and joining me again. And hopefully we'll be back on our weekly schedule here as we go forward to the fall. I mean, that is the plan. Summer is this interesting time of busyness and laziness. So I was busy doing some creative projects and lazy about doing others. And I'm sure that a lot of you can relate. Sometimes in the summer, it's about being out of your desk and away from your desk and having those experiences that will feed your creativity as the year goes on. And for those of you who are interested, we will be running our Let Go and Begin workshop this fall, and I'll keep you updated on that. My friend Tanya at Tanya Walsh Yoga and I run a workshop, creativity workshop seasonally for resetting and reprioritizing creativity in your life. And when we have the dates and times, we will, of course, let you know. And if you're following me on social media, you will see that we did a summer series for Yoga Farm Ithaca this year, which was really a wonderful opportunity to meet so many people and talk to them about setting intention with their creativity, making time and space for it, which is, of course, our call to arms, and in the work that both Tanya and I do. So if you are interested this fall, we really would love to have you, and just pay attention to those social media posts and they will let you know when and where you need to show up. So as we keep going today with decluttering books and what brought me to this topic, well, one of the things is just a basic, as we get ready for fall, we kind of want to get rid of the old and bring in the new as we set up for our fall projects and planning. And part of that for me is decluttering and getting my space the way I want it, so that I feel inspired and excited by it. And then part of this conversation also comes from one that a friend named Andrea, who is a wonderful singer and musician and creative person, said she found this stack of children's books from her own childhood. And she said it was really hard to even imagine getting rid of them. How can I possibly get rid of these books that meant so much to me and that I've saved for all of these years? And what do I do with them? I can't possibly get rid of them. And the answer is, there is no answer. The answer is only you know what books you can and should get rid of. And some people even think getting rid of books is just sacrilege in general, that having a vast library that showcases all of the books you've ever read says something about you. Some people like to be surrounded by those things that they love. Some people don't want anything on their shelves but books they haven't read yet, as a reminder of all there is to read going forward. And as soon as they've read a book, they let it go. And no matter what you are, what kind of book hoarder you are, the reality is that it is hard. And so what I'm hoping to do today is just talk about some of the things that go into our mind processes when we have to declutter our books, which feel like old friends, which feel like a statement on how much we've learned and where we've come, and then can also be this statement on how much left there is to learn. And I guess I should start there, which is just this idea that there are so many books, you are never going to read them all. So give yourself a break, okay? And if you're a collector of books and you love books and you love to be around them, that's okay. And if you want to pack them up and move them to every apartment, every house, that's your prerogative. And if you want to eliminate every book and only keep hardcovers, that's also your prerogative. So there's no right way to declutter books. But I think what happened when everybody was Marie Kondoing everything, and if it didn't spark joy, then it shouldn't be in your house. And books are one of the things that she says are, if you've read it, there's no reason to keep it. And I don't believe that. I believe that there's many, many, many of us where reading is one of life's great pleasures, and having those books around us is important. And I think that there's many of us who, like me, for example, taught for a living, and the idea of being in a house without books feels very odd. But did I need 14 copies of The Catcher in the Rye because one year we used one kind of edition and another year we used another, and one has all my notes in it and one is a fresh, pristine, really interesting edition that I found? No, probably not. But does that mean that it's easy to get rid of them just because I have multiple copies? No, it doesn't. Because what do I do with the one that I've meticulously taken notes in since I was 21 and had my first classroom of students? And what do I do with the one that's so pretty and is the one that I really enjoy looking at on my shelf? And what do I do with the one that I want to loan out to friends or give to my son? So it does take some time to really go through and declutter books. And over the years, I've gone through periods where I have gotten rid of so many paperbacks because I just felt like they don't save as well, they don't look as nice, etc. And I've gone through periods where I've desperately tried to buy all of those same paperbacks back because I can't believe I got rid of them in the first place. But the second thing I would offer, besides this idea of sparking joy, which I think if you're listening to a podcast about decluttering books already spark joy for you, so you don't really have to think about that one too much. But space dictates your reality. If you're living in a studio apartment, you have a different space need than if you have a house that has a library dedicated to it, where you can easily fill up 6 or 7 bookshelves, no problem, have books on your night table, have books in the living room. That dictates the size of your library. And I'm really a fan of the container concept, which is if you have 3 bookshelves, that is your limit. If you go over that limit, then it's time to purge. And what to purge is the harder question, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, let your space dictate your reality. If you have space for books and you've determined what it is, then let that be your limit. Let that be your container. And as you're going through this, ask yourself, are you collecting or are you curating? Because those are 2 different things. If you're collecting, then you don't mind if you have 14 copies of The Catcher in the Rye. If you're curating, then you might want to only have a first edition or only have that pre-hardcover, because it's important to you to have the book around and have the book in your field of vision. But it might be more important to you that your bookshelves look nice, or it might be more important to you that you have that one that's full of every note that you've ever made. Whatever you're determining your curation possibility to be, your curation modality and the way that you're thinking about books, let it be that and go through your books at that point. If you're a collector and you just like them all, then obviously your space is going to be filled with multiples, and that might be okay. I went to a bookstore in London when I was there this summer that was filled with only Alice in Wonderland books. It was a magical place, and I loved it. But there was something about it. I didn't buy one thing there, which might be a surprise to a lot of you who know me, because for me, it's about the thrill of the hunt. When I find a really cool edition of a book, or at a thrift or at a book sale or a used bookstore, it's a really interesting moment for me to hold the book in my hand. When I can go into a bookstore that's nothing but a collection of curated Alice in Wonderland books, there's no thrill of the hunt there. And of course, they're incredibly expensive as well, which, is great if I didn't already have a small collection of those books at home as well. Some people, like I said, the TBR piles are the to be read piles that they have of books are important to them, and they want to keep loads of them so they always have a new book around. And it's actually looking at the books that they haven't read that gives them the joy, that sparks the joy, and looking at the books that they have read doesn't do the same thing. You would have to determine which of those camps you fall into. And a lot of us are in the middle, right? We have some books that are TBR. My night table is only books that I haven't read, but my bookshelves in my office are books that I have read, and often books that I refer to a lot, which we'll get to that in a second as well. But we all have these personal stories, right? We have teaching copies and student copies and hardcovers and paperbacks and signed books. And because we're Gen X, because I'm a Gen Xer, I shouldn't say we, I'm a Gen Xer, we're sort of used to buying multiples of the same piece of art. I mean, I have Joni Mitchell's Hejira on probably a cassette tape. I have it on vinyl. I had it on CD. I stream it, of course. I have like a streaming copy of it. And I just feel like I've been buying the same Joni Mitchell records in every form since 1987. The same is true with books. Like I kind of am used to collecting all of these different forms of the same book. And so that also is part of my collection and part of what I have to determine what I want space for. Do I want space for new books? Do I want to start collecting any edition that I come across of a certain author or certain title? You know, we're sort of used to that in our generation. And I think that there are a lot of people who aren't. You know, if you're super into audiobooks or you're into your e-reader, the idea of collecting or having these books in your house, it's not as important, or it doesn't feel as natural. Like you'd rather have the square footage for something else, you know, maybe a hobby, maybe you want to have a studio table, an instrument, something else that inspires you, hopefully. But for the readers in the room, you know that being surrounded by books is a really cozy feeling, and it is inspiring in its own way. But I think there are a lot of ways to sort of purge. And I think, you know, thinking about library sales and passing books on to friends and bringing them to secondhand stores that still buy back books. Third Place Books here in Seattle definitely does book buyback. And it's a great way to sort of recycle and refresh those, especially the hardcover books, that recent literary fiction that maybe you didn't connect to and you don't feel a reason to like hang on to. Those are great to recycle in that way. But you can also think about trading, hosting a book swap with friends, and really thinking about what it is that you want to retain in your collection and what it is you're willing to let go of. And the reality is we live in a world where if you let go of a book, you pretty much can find it relatively inexpensively to get it back. Maybe not a first edition of, you know, Rabbit is Rich, which I'm always on the hunt for. But certainly if you gave away a copy of Lessons in Chemistry, I'm sure you could find a new one pretty easily. And, you know, what I would do is sort of start with the basics. You know, when you're thinking about old books or children's books or craft books, like books that you refer to over and over again, like start with the basics. Does it smell bad? So many of us have moved books over and over and over again. And, you know, there's water damage or mold, or they're sitting in a cardboard box and they just smell gross. Like, does it smell that good books smell, or does it smell kind of gross? And if it smells kind of gross, this is your permission to get rid of it. And it doesn't mean to sell it to a secondhand bookstore, but to literally just get rid of it. Throw it away. You don't want any mold in your house. And nobody else does too. So don't feel like you need to like bring it to the Goodwill and donate it, because guess what? You don't need to. Damaged books, if the cover's ripped off, if you know that it's falling apart, this may be your sign to declutter that book. Now, there are some caveats to that. Of course, if this is your most cherished copy of Richard Scarry's, you know, Busy Town book from when you were a child and the cover's falling off, but you can't even imagine parting with it, I'm not suggesting that you do. But if this is your cover of Jude the Obscure from high school, that the cover is ripped off and you have never looked at it again, this is your permission to let go of it. And the third way I would sort of say is, am I really going to reread this? Am I really going to use this? Am I really going to read this book? Maybe it's a book that's been on your TBR pile for 2 years and you've never reached for it once. You pick other books on top of it. Maybe it's time to let that one go too, especially if it's irks you that you haven't read it. For example, in my own life, I had a copy of Infinite Jest. I never read it in the 90s. I carried it with me and moved it many, many times. And I finally said, I either have to read this or I have to let it go. And I read it, which is a whole nother conversation. But I was glad that I had that definitive moment where it was, I'm either going to read this right now or I'm going to let it go, because it would just stare at me in all its 1,000-page glory, and I would feel bad that I didn't read it or hadn't read it. I felt like a very bad Gen Xer at that point, but it's okay. I mean, I read it and I have a lot to say about it. And if you're interested in what I have to say about it, maybe we'll do an episode on books that everybody says you should read, but maybe you don't need to. Anyway, I think when decluttering books, you should aim for 10% and not 50%. So unless, again, space dictates the reality. So if you're downsizing, obviously you need to make room for all of your other things, your bed, your cooking utensils, whatever else fills your space. But if you are just wanting to declutter books because you want to free up some room on your shelves, you want to free up some room in your mind, then aim for 10%. So if you have 100 books, 10 of those books can go away, right? So if you have more than that, obviously think about it that way. But if as you're going and you get rid of those 10%, that 10%, and you feel like you want to do more, then do more. If getting to that 10% is really difficult and it's really hard for you to make decisions, or you get decision fatigue and you don't want to keep going, then just stop at 10. But I think it's the idea that you don't have to eliminate everything at once, that you can just do a little bit at a time. And one way to do this is to look at your shelves or whatever situation you have, boxes, and just pull out what you love first. Pull out those books that you can't even imagine parting ways with. And I doubt it's all of them in that box or on that shelf. There's probably on a shelf full of 20 books, maybe 3 that you're like, oh my gosh, I love this book so much. This is one of my favorite books. And I look at it all the time, or I reread it every summer, or I just like seeing its title on the shelf and it makes me feel accomplished or excited or inspired. Then of course, those are the ones you start with. And then once you pull what you love, it's easier to see the rest as maybe this is just taking up space, or I don't think I'm ever going to look at this again. I've never touched this again in my life, and I don't think it needs to be here anymore, because I have all these new fresh books that I'm hoping to read in the next year. I think that there's no need to do anything in one sitting, and you can sleep on anything and it can do wonders. And this is, of course, for any decluttering task, not just books, but of course, for me, books are always in this process. And I am always in the process of kind of reorganizing my shelves or rethinking it. And especially as I finish new books, I want them to have a home on my shelf. And so if they don't fit, then I need to think about the shelf, right? But I also don't pressure myself to do a big purge all in one day. Now, if time is a constraint because you're moving and, your lease is up and you need to move to another apartment, well, then, a little a day is still okay up until the time you move, knowing that you'll have progress that has to be done before a certain date. You can figure out the time or the number of books or whatever it is that you're using as your category and work from there. And I would say put a moratorium on buying books for a month. Read only what's on your TBR that you already own. Read only the books you already own that you haven't read. And maybe even for 1 month, say you don't keep a lot of books that you haven't read in your house, reread some old favorites. See if they still resonate with you. I mean, this is a really powerful thing that not many people do, which is to go back and reread things that they've already read. You might reread one book. I have a friend who rereads like Anne of Green Gables every year in the fall. Like that's her little cozy moment. But that's it. That's her tradition. And that's what she does. She doesn't go back and reread any other children's books or any other books from her life, just that one. So if that's the case, then why do you have the others on your shelf? What are they there for? What purpose does it serve? And get really clear on that. And that might help you declutter them if that's what you want to do. I don't think you should be keeping your textbooks from college. I am definitely There's no need to have reference books and textbooks from college if you no longer care about that subject. So if you are a psychologist and you have your Intro to Psych book still, that might be okay, I guess. But it also might be kind of silly at this point when you've gotten, higher degrees and you don't really need to go back and talk about, Maslow's pyramid anymore, right? But maybe it makes you feel something and you want to have it. That's again up to you. But I think reference books and textbooks are easily the first things that should go. There's no reason to keep a physics book if you are not researching it for a novel that you're writing. There's no reason to keep your earth science book if you don't do anything with geology. Just allow those big, fat, heavy books to go so that you can make room for the things that you do love. And don't be ashamed of the things that you do love. If you are super into romance or super into fantasy, fill those bookshelves with those things. Don't feel like you have to have certain titles to make you appear a certain way. I think there is a lot of bookshelf energy on Instagram and all the social media platforms where they're either color-coded or they're faced the wrong way, and so all you see are the white pages. I think that that's kind of crazy to me, but I also think there's a sense of people feeling a little ashamed about what they like and what they want others to know that they're reading. And I just think own it, be you. There's so many books out there and there's so many types of books and genres that people are interested in. And who am I to say what should be on your bookshelf or not? You do you. But I would also say, look at your multiples. Make sure you don't have 100 copies of the same book. And I say this as someone who has many, many, many copies of a lot of books, but I've over the years let go of the fact that I'm probably not going back into a traditional classroom anytime soon. And even if I were, would I be teaching those books still? And that was a really hard thing for me to come to terms with. And it really took a lot of energy and a lot of thought. And I didn't do it, 1 year. I had to wait till the next year, and I would do a little bit of it at a time. I would keep my really good Shakespeare collection, but I might get rid of like the 3 other Romeo and Juliet random paperbacks that I had, because it was about letting go of an identity. And that's what makes decluttering hard. Decluttering children's books can be hard because you feel like you're letting go of your childhood. Decluttering textbooks can be hard because it's almost like letting go of another alternative path you could have taken with your life. Letting go of craft books can be hard because maybe you're no longer making time for that craft, whether that's writing or music or art, and you feel badly about that. And the thing is your bookshelf shouldn't make you feel bad about yourself. It should make you feel inspired and good and spacious and excited about what's to come. And I think the thing is that as you move into the decluttering process, to be gentle with yourself and to realize that it can bring up a lot of emotions when you're getting rid of stuff. I was helping my son do his bookshelf the other day because he wanted to. It was not my idea. He said, a lot of these books I don't even read anymore. And they were books that he was very connected to. The Dog Man series, all of those graphic novels, and he just collected them. And I said, okay, we have this shelf in his closet where we put his special children's books. I said, so do you want these to go there? And he said, no, I don't need them anymore. And I said, okay. And there was part of it that was harder for me than it was for him because it was such an integral part of his scholastic book fair experience. But it's his experience. And if he wants to buy back the Dog Man series when he's 30, he can. But it's not up to me to say what's essential and what's not for him. Now, there are a couple of books that I know we read thousands of times when he was young, and some of those are in his closet. And you know what? A couple of those are on my shelf because the memory of that time is so important to me that I like to hold the book in my hand every once in a while. And that's okay too. And there might be a time where I'm willing to let that go and realize that the memory I can revisit anytime I want. I don't need to hold the book to have the memory. But for someone who cherishes books, it's a big symbol of that memory, and I want to keep it. So I just encourage you to look at your bookshelves, see what needs to be there. Take this opportunity in the changing of seasons to give it a fresh start, an inspirational start. Keep the books that make you want to read, make you want to be creative, make you want to have a cozy thought in the fall with a candle and looking at your books and looking at all of the things that you know and feel in your heart, and that you've been able to enter into so many lives and adventures and knowledge with that transportation available to you at your fingertips. And of course, let me know what you're reading. And I'm currently reading Hag Seed by Margaret Atwood, which is a retelling of The Tempest, and it's quite good. Thanks for listening to The Literary Sipper. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. If you did, please subscribe and leave a rating and review if you're feeling especially generous. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep putting your voice in the world. It's waiting for you.